South Africa marked the anniversary of the Soweto uprisings earlier this week. It's been 45 years since demonstrations by black school children against education using the medium of Afrikaans started on the morning of the 16th of June 1976 in Soweto. In the days that followed, many learners were assaulted, shot, and killed by police in a display of unbridled, vengeful brutality by the state. Decades later, and the school system in South Africa is once again under the spotlight, this time facing a different set of challenges and causes of unhappiness among learners. Allegations of racism at schools make news headlines regularly, with learners across the country speaking out in protest about their experiences of racism at their schools, at the hands of fellow learners, teachers, and school heads. I'm Catherine Rice, journalist for News 24's Multimedia Department, and this is The Story. This week we'll be talking about the most recent allegations of racism at a private school in Cape Town.
You're listening to The Story. It's a podcast by News 24. We'll speak to journalists and experts about the week's biggest story. This is what we saw, heard, and uncovered this week.
We're talking to News 24 journalist Sisona Gakamba, who covered the story that unfolded at Deutsche Schule Kapstadt, a private international German school on the slopes of Table Mountain. Sisona, parents and pupils protested outside the school this week. Why exactly were they protesting?
Thank you, Catherine. Well, parents and pupils of the private school, German International School, Cape Town, were protesting after a teacher told pupils that black children do not have role models because their fathers are in jail and their mothers are prostitutes.
The children, I believe, were absolutely outraged, as they rightly should have been. And what happened? What did the school do?
Well, Catherine, I reached out to the school and they confirmed the incident to me. The headmaster, Alexandra Kermser, said the incident happened as part of a discussion on Black economic empowerment lesson. He conceded that the remarks were considered discriminatory and added that the school's management temporarily suspended the teacher and initiated disciplinary proceedings against her, as required by the school's policy. He did not go into detail about what exactly the disciplinary hearing delved in, but what he did mention is that the disciplinary hearing was chaired by an external labor law expert, and statements from both pupils and the teacher were presented. They said that there was also counseling to the students, and the teacher was therefore suspended for a week or so.
But the fact is she's been reinstated, and I think that's drawn a lot of anger from the pupils who attend that school. Did they seem united in their fight against racism at the school, the student body? Or are the protests coming from a minority of the student body?
Yeah, they are seeming to be united, Catherine. I mean, I spoke to one pupil who's also part of the SRC at the school, and he actually expressed that they were all outraged by the remarks made by the teacher, which is why they were embarking on silent protests, because they are not happy that the teacher has been reinstated. I mean, the pupil says that they do not feel safe around the teacher and actually believe that not enough was done by the school.
I mean, Sisona, it's not an isolated incident. Last year, a lot of pupils across the country shared their experiences of discrimination on social media. But it seems that not much has really changed since then. And perhaps it's only when pupils actually protest that it gets the attention of the media, and then the school pays attention. Would you agree with that?
I agree with this sentiment. I mean, it seems schools across the country, especially private ones, are somehow becoming reactionary. They only start acting against racism, discrimination when it's brought up, and are not focusing on changing their transformation policies to ensure that there's inclusivity. And in the first place, if their transformation policies were clear about non-racialism, then we wouldn't be sitting where we are every week, if you can say. I mean, there was a school a few weeks ago where a teacher was also suspended for using the K word on a pupil.
And also, just last month, there were parents who were protesting at Cornwall Hill College in Pretoria, and they alleged that there were racial tensions that the school just had failed to deal with. Can you tell us a bit more about that incident and about some of the other incidents you may know about or may have covered?
Well, 3 weeks ago, parents and pupils from Cornwall Hill College braved the cold weather to hand over a memorandum of demands to the school. That particular demonstration was also attended by the Education MEC in Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi. They called on, among other things, that the school should take concrete steps to change its culture and make it one that is inclusive and supportive of different races and cultures. Past and present pupils from this particular college have been complaining about microaggressions at the school, how their hair is always a problem, how they are not allowed to play certain sports like soccer, and how just teachers are ill-treating, especially the minority. So the parents also called on the school to make changes to its curriculum and how it was taught. They called on the curriculum to expose pupils to South Africa's diverse cultures and institutional rights and responsibilities. But Catherine, what was more interesting in that particular demonstration was that when the school stood up and actually accepted the memorandum and said that it heeded the call or the complaints raised by the concerned parents and pupils and actually apologized for delays in transforming, which means that they knew that there was lack of transformation at the school, but they've taken up until this level where pupils have to protest to actually react.
Exactly, and hopefully schools really will start paying attention now, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more of these stories, and of course Sasona will be covering those for us. That was Sasona Kamba. Thank you for joining us. We are now joined by Assistant Editor for Breaking News, Sheldon Marias. Sheldon, in your years as an editor, stories about racism in schools seem to have become all too common. I mean, is that the reality? Are racial tensions in schools increasing over time? And if so, what do you think are the main causes?
I think there's always been racial tensions in schools. I mean, you can go, as far back as the 90s, as South Africa itself was integrating from a separated society due to apartheid. Obviously, you had pockets of integrated schools, but mostly those were private schools. And at the time, predominantly Black people were excluded from even accessing those, just because they were way too expensive. But you did have pockets of integration. I think in general, as the country was coming together, and if you saw that there was racial tensions within South Africa as a society, as a country, this was spilling over into schools as well. So I think that the racial tensions have always been there. Another reason why I say that is because in recent years, people who were at school during the 90s, the early 2000s have as a result of the current protests and tensions, started speaking up about their own experiences at school, saying just because it wasn't spoken about during those years of the mid 90s, the early 2000s, even the mid 2000s, it doesn't mean that it wasn't there. These were our experiences. And I think in the age of social media, in the age of recordings, as we've seen with a lot of other aspects of our societal fabric playing out, these have now come to be recorded. You've also got a generation, Catherine, which I believe is more vocal in speaking up about racial tension, racism at schools, whether it be from within the pupil cohort or from teachers, from parents, from the school governing body. I think you've got a generation who are speaking up and standing out and saying, listen, we're not going to tolerate this. But at the core of it, racial tensions, I believe, have always been present in our schools.
And Sheldon, do you think that education authorities have done enough or are doing enough to try and transform schools?
The transformation you look at is not just only racial, but there's class transformation as well. A lot of private schools obviously do have, bursaries and attempts to bring promising scholars from underprivileged backgrounds into the schools. However, where the education department, I think, has fallen short is in equipping teachers to manage the transformation. So in equipping teachers not only to teach the subjects that they are experts at, but in terms of navigating young South Africans through racial tensions, racism, a country that has come from a very fractured past not too long ago, and how they find a place and a voice for themselves within the community. And I think many of these racist incidents involve teachers, which is concerning in the sense that either teachers are not aware of the messaging that they're putting across, if it is racist, if it's implicit racism. If it's explicit racism, that's even more concerning, because you've got a power dynamic of a teacher who should know better, imparting this or directing it towards a pupil who is in their teenage years or even younger as well, and is very, in their formative years as well. So it can be very damaging.
Sheldon, it's not just, the teachers being racist in some incidents, it's also between the parents themselves. I mean, earlier this month, there was a fight between black and white parents that broke out at the Witbank Technical High School in Mpumalanga. And Sheldon, that school had to suspend classes, and it was clearly, a situation that was getting out of control. Do you think we could be in some sort of downward spiral?
I don't think we're in a downward spiral. I think we're going to have these incidents of racism. And I think in a way, it's good that they are surfacing, or they're being spoken about, that they're being filmed, because it does then get people talking. Now, obviously, matters of race often see people on two sides of a fence, just hurling, shouting at each other, as opposed to listening. But I do think it's good, because it does ultimately shows you what your sores are. And the only way you can ever treat your sores is by firstly acknowledging them, and then seeking out the help and the treatment that you need. So I don't think we're in a downward spiral. It certainly isn't great for the South African psyche at a time when you're battling load shedding, you're battling COVID-19. A government which is failing in rolling out vaccines, and then you think, geez, our schools aren't even safe from racism, and it's the parents who are at the heart of this. So it isn't great by any means, but I don't think that we're in a downward spiral, because I think in looking at it, we have to look at it holistically. There are pockets of excellence across our education system. And I use that word pockets because sometimes it's in spite of government's efforts, which we know has been, at times woefully inept when it comes to the education system. And this is across the board, whether it be your private schools, whether it be rural-based schools who perform sterlingly every year, whether you get pupils who overcome the most, some of the greatest obstacles and succeed. And the friendships that are built, the bonds that are built, the children. And I think this is a lot of the change, and a lot of the agitation is being led by the youth, and I think that should be a positive that we have that we acknowledge, and not and not see it as a downward spiral. But it certainly isn't viewing the world through rose-tinted glasses. We have deep problems within our education system, because that education system is rooted in a country which itself has deep problems, deeply rooted problems from our recent past, and and even further than that. Due to Black people being treated as second-class citizens in their own country, being subjected to the most brutal racism at times, and that has left a lasting legacy. No matter how many years we've been a democracy.
Absolutely. And as you say, children need to have a safe space at school, and this isn't happening for a lot of children in our country. So definitely a lot more still needs to be done. Thank you so much for your time, Sheldon. That was Sheldon Marias, Assistant Editor for Breaking News. That's it from us this week. I'm Catherine Rice, and this episode was produced with the help of Bertram Malchus.